The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse apartment on Manhattan's Upper East Side, casting long golden shadows across the marble floors. Richard Coleman adjusted his Italian silk tie one final time as he stood before the bathroom mirror, his reflection showing a man who had everything money could buy, except peace of mind. At 52, his salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his custom-tailored suit impeccable, but the lines around his eyes told the story of sleepless nights and growing paranoia. The loss of his wife Margaret to cancer 3 years ago had changed everything. What once felt like a home now felt like a fortress he needed to protect from everyone, including those closest to him. Trust had become a luxury he could no longer afford, especially after his business partner's betrayal had cost him millions just 6 months earlier. The wound was still fresh, the sting of deception sharp enough to make him question everyone's motives. As he walked through the spacious apartment, his footsteps echoed against the polished floors. The place was immaculate, not a single item out of place, not a speck of dust on any surface. This wasn't his doing. It was the meticulous work of Maria Santos, his housekeeper for the past 8 months. She had come highly recommended by the agency, with glowing references and an impeccable work record. Yet something about her quiet efficiency unsettled him. Maria was different from the others who had worked for him. Where previous housekeepers had been chatty and eager to please, she maintained a professional distance that he found both refreshing and suspicious. She was perhaps 40 years old, with kind eyes and graying hair that she kept neatly pulled back. Her English carried the soft accent of her native El Salvador, and she moved through his home with a grace that suggested she took genuine pride in her work. But Richard had learned that appearances could be deceiving. The most trustworthy facades often hid the darkest intentions. His ex-partner David had been like a brother to him, sharing family dinners and vacation photos, right up until the day Richard discovered the embezzlement that had nearly destroyed his real estate empire. This morning, as Richard prepared for another long day at the office, an idea began to form in his mind. It started as a whisper of doubt, a nagging question that had been growing stronger each day. Maria had access to everything: his home, his personal belongings, his private spaces. She knew his routines, his habits, when he would be home and when he wouldn't. If she wanted to, she could easily take advantage of his trust. The safe in his study contained more than just important documents and emergency cash. There were family heirlooms that had belonged to Margaret, her grandmother's diamond earrings, a pearl necklace that had been passed down through 3 generations, and a collection of rare gold coins his father had given him. The monetary value was substantial, but the sentimental worth was immeasurable. Standing in the doorway of his study, Richard stared at the imposing steel safe built into the wall behind his mahogany desk. The digital lock had been installed just last year, a 6-digit code that only he knew. He had never told Maria about its contents, never even acknowledged its existence in her presence, but he was certain she had noticed it during her careful cleaning of his office space. The test would be simple, he decided. He would leave the safe open, just slightly ajar, and see what happened. It would look accidental, as if he had been in a hurry and forgotten to close it properly. Any honest person would either ignore it completely or, at most, gently push it closed out of respect for his privacy. But someone with ulterior motives might be tempted to take a closer look, perhaps even help themselves to something small that wouldn't be immediately missed. Richard's hands trembled slightly as he entered his combination and pulled the heavy door open. Inside, neat stacks of cash sat alongside velvet jewelry boxes and important documents. He adjusted the door so it appeared to be almost closed, but remained open by perhaps an inch, enough that the interior light cast a thin golden line across the carpet, visible to anyone who looked carefully. His heart pounded as he gathered his briefcase and coat. This felt wrong somehow. Margaret would have disapproved of his suspicion, would have reminded him that trust was a gift to be given freely, not a test to be failed. But Margaret had lived in a different world, a simpler time, when people's word meant something, and friendship wasn't a commodity to be bought and sold. As Richard walked toward the front door, he could hear Maria in the kitchen, quietly preparing his morning coffee as she did every day. The sound of her humming a soft Spanish melody drifted through the apartment, a gentle soundtrack to his growing anxiety. She always arrived at 7:30 sharp, never early, never late, and worked with a consistency that he had come to depend on, even as he questioned her motives. "Good morning, Mr. Coleman," Maria called out as she heard his footsteps. Her voice was warm, respectful, carrying the same professional kindness she had shown every day since she started working for him. "Good morning, Maria," he replied, his voice catching slightly. The guilt was already beginning to gnaw at him, but he pushed it aside. This was necessary, he told himself, in a world where everyone seemed to have an angle, where loyalty could be purchased and trust was a weakness to be exploited. He needed to know where he stood. The elevator ride to the parking garage felt endless. Richard's reflection in the polished steel doors showed a man at war with himself, torn between the need for security and the desire to believe in human goodness. As he climbed into his Mercedes and pulled out into the morning traffic of New York City, he couldn't shake the image of that slightly open safe door, like a mouth waiting to reveal its secrets. The real question wasn't whether Maria would notice the open safe. In her thorough cleaning routine, she certainly would. The question was what she would do when she found it, and whether Richard was prepared for either answer to his test. The Manhattan traffic crawled along Fifth Avenue as Richard sat in his Mercedes, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Despite the heated leather seats and the gentle hum of classical music from the premium sound system, he couldn't shake the chill that had settled in his chest. Every few minutes, his mind wandered back to the apartment, to that slightly ajar safe door, to Maria moving through his home with her quiet efficiency. His phone buzzed with notifications, emails from clients, meeting reminders, the endless digital noise of a successful business life, but he couldn't concentrate on any of it. The guilt was eating at him like acid, making his expensive breakfast taste like sawdust in his mouth. What kind of man had he become? When had suspicion replaced trust as his default emotion? Meanwhile, back in the penthouse, Maria Santos hummed softly as she began her morning routine. She had developed a systematic approach over her 8 months of employment, kitchen first, then living areas, bedrooms, and finally Mr. Coleman's study. It was a pattern that ensured maximum efficiency while respecting the privacy of her employer's personal spaces. As she wiped down the granite countertops in the kitchen, Maria's thoughts drifted to her own life. Her small apartment in Queens felt like a different world compared to this palace of marble and silk. She shared that modest space with her teenage daughter, Sophia, who was excelling in her senior year of high school and had dreams of becoming a nurse. Every dollar Maria earned here was carefully saved, part of a fund that would help Sophia attend college, without the crushing debt that had defined Maria's own young adulthood. The irony wasn't lost on her. She cleaned the home of a man who probably spent more on wine in a month than she made in a year, yet she felt rich in ways that money couldn't measure. Sophia's laughter, their Sunday dinners together, the pride in her daughter's report cards, these were treasures that no safe could contain. Maria had noticed the change in Mr. Coleman over the past few months. The man who had initially been politely distant had become increasingly watchful, his eyes following her movements with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She had worked for wealthy families before, had seen how money could make people paranoid, suspicious of everyone around them. It was sad, really, the way abundance could create such emptiness. As she moved into the living room, Maria's practiced eye caught something that seemed out of place. The morning light revealed fingerprints on the coffee table that hadn't been there yesterday, and one of the throw pillows was slightly askew. These were small details that most people would never notice, but Maria had been cleaning homes for over 20 years. She had learned to read the subtle signs of human presence like a detective reading clues. The vacuum cleaner's gentle whir filled the apartment as she worked, her movements economical and precise. She took pride in her work, not because she loved cleaning, but because she understood that excellence in any endeavor was a reflection of character. Her mother had taught her that lesson back in El Salvador, in their tiny house with its dirt floor and corrugated metal roof. "Mija," her mother had said, "how you do anything is how you do everything." By 10:30, Maria had reached Mr. Coleman's study. This was always the most delicate part of her routine. The room contained so many personal items, photographs of his late wife, expensive artwork, shelves lined with leather-bound books that looked more valuable than her entire wardrobe. She always cleaned this space with extra care, understanding that she was entering a sanctuary of memories and grief. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits. Maria began with the bookshelves, carefully removing each volume, dusting it and replacing it in exactly the same position. It was meticulous work, but she found something meditative about the process. As she moved toward the desk area, something caught her eye that made her freeze mid-step. The safe, that imposing steel door built into the wall, was slightly open. Not wide open, but enough that she could see the golden glow of the interior light spilling onto the carpet in a thin line. Maria's heart began to race. In all her months of working here, she had never seen the safe anything but tightly closed. Mr. Coleman was obsessively careful about his possessions, checking locks twice, setting the security system religiously. This had to be an accident, a moment of distraction in his morning routine. She stood motionless for several seconds, uncertain of what to do. Through the narrow opening, she could glimpse stacks of cash, the glint of jewelry, important-looking documents. The monetary value of the contents was probably more than she would earn in several years of honest work. A different person might have been tempted. Someone struggling with debt, someone without moral anchors, someone who felt the world owed them something. They might have seen opportunity in that slightly open door, but Maria saw only vulnerability. She thought about her daughter Sophia, about the values they had discussed just the night before over their simple dinner of rice and beans. Integrity, Sophia had said, working on a school essay about character, isn't about what you do when people are watching. It's about what you do when no one would ever know. Without touching anything else in the vicinity, Maria reached for her phone. Her fingers hesitated over the keypad for a moment as she considered her options. She could simply close the safe and pretend she had never seen it. She could ignore it entirely and clean around it, but both of those choices felt wrong, incomplete. Instead, she composed a text message to Mr. Coleman, her English careful and respectful. "Mr. Coleman, I am cleaning your study and noticed your safe door appears to be open. I have not touched anything and wanted to make you aware. Should I close it, or would you prefer to handle it yourself when you return? Maria." As she hit send, Maria felt a strange sense of peace. She had done the right thing, the only thing her conscience would allow. Whatever Mr. Coleman's response might be, she would sleep well tonight knowing that she had honored the trust he had placed in her, even if he didn't seem to trust her at all. The message sent, she continued her cleaning around the safe, careful not to disturb anything that might be considered evidence of whatever had caused this unusual situation. She had no way of knowing that miles away, in a conference room overlooking Central Park, her employer was staring at his phone screen with tears beginning to form in his eyes. Richard's hands trembled as he stared at the text message on his phone screen. The boardroom around him seemed to fade into background noise. The quarterly reports, the client presentations, the endless chatter of corporate ambition, all of it became meaningless white noise as he read Maria's words again and again. "Excuse me," he managed to say to the room full of executives, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I need to step out for a moment." The conference room door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving him alone in the marble hallway of his 42nd floor office. His legs felt weak and he leaned against the wall for support, the cool surface a stark contrast to the heat building in his chest. The shame hit him like a physical blow. What had he done? He had tested an innocent woman, a hard-working mother, who had shown him nothing but respect and dedication for 8 months. He had set a trap for someone whose only crime was being in his employ during a time when his faith in humanity had crumbled. The realization of his own cruelty was overwhelming. With shaking fingers, he typed back, "Maria, thank you for letting me know. Please close the safe for me. I must have been distracted this morning. I'll be home shortly." But even as he sent the message, Richard knew he couldn't return to his meetings. Not today. Not with this weight crushing his chest. He gathered his belongings and told his assistant he was leaving early, ignoring her concerned questions about his pale complexion and unsteady gait. Back in the penthouse, Maria received his response with relief. She had worried that her message might seem presumptuous, that perhaps Mr. Coleman had left the safe open intentionally. For some reason, she couldn't understand. Rich people, she had learned, sometimes did things that seemed strange to others. She approached the safe carefully, still mindful not to look directly at its contents. As she gently pushed the heavy door closed, she heard the electronic lock engage with a soft beep. The golden line of light disappeared, and the study returned to its usual state of quiet dignity. But something made her pause. In the brief moment before the door closed completely, she had caught a glimpse of something that made her heart skip. There, among the stacks of currency and official documents, was a small framed photograph, a picture of Mr. Coleman with a beautiful woman who could only be his late wife. They were both younger in the photo, their faces radiant with joy, probably from their wedding day. Maria had seen pictures of Mrs. Coleman throughout the apartment, but this one was different. It was private, intimate, kept in the most secure place in his home, along with his most precious possessions. The image of that small frame, nestled among the valuables, told her more about her employer's heart than 8 months of polite interactions ever had. She understood then, with startling clarity, why Mr. Coleman had become increasingly distant and watchful. It wasn't just about money or possessions, it was about protecting the last pieces of a life he had shared with someone he loved deeply. The safe wasn't just a repository for valuables, it was a shrine to a love that death had stolen, but couldn't diminish. As she continued cleaning the study, Maria found herself thinking about her own losses. Her husband Miguel had died in a construction accident when Sophia was only 8 years old. The grief had nearly destroyed her, leaving her angry at the world and suspicious of everyone's motives. She remembered the way she had pushed away friends who tried to help, how she had interpreted every kind gesture as pity or manipulation. It was Sophia who had saved her, who had reminded her that closing her heart meant closing out all the good that still existed in the world. Her daughter's resilience had taught her that trust was not a weakness to be avoided, but a strength to be carefully cultivated. When Richard arrived home 2 hours later, he found Maria in the kitchen, preparing what appeared to be more food than usual. The aroma of homemade soup filled the air, and she had set the dining table with his finest china, something she had never done before. "Maria," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I need to—" "Mr. Coleman," she interrupted gently, "please sit. You look very tired." He wanted to confess everything, the test, his suspicions, his shame, but something in her manner stopped him. There was a new warmth in her eyes, an understanding that hadn't been there that morning. "I made some soup," she said, ladling the fragrant broth into a bowl. "My grandmother's recipe from El Salvador. She used to say that food made with love could heal many things." As he tasted the soup, Richard felt tears threatening again. It was delicious, but more than that, it was made with care. Maria had somehow intuited that he needed more than just sustenance. He needed kindness. "Maria," he said finally, "I owe you an apology." She looked at him with quiet patience, neither encouraging nor discouraging his confession. "I left that safe open intentionally," he continued, the words tumbling out despite his shame. "I wanted to test your honesty. After my business partner betrayed me, after losing Margaret, I stopped trusting anyone. I thought everyone had an agenda, everyone wanted something from me." Maria set down her own spoon and looked at him directly. "Mr. Coleman, I have worked for many families, rich families, poor families, happy families, sad families. I have learned that pain makes people do things they would not normally do. It makes them build walls when they need bridges." "You should be angry with me," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am not angry," Maria replied simply. "I am sad. Sad that you have been carrying such heavy weight alone. Sad that the world has made you feel you cannot trust the goodness that still exists." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "When I saw your safe open, I saw more than money and jewels. I saw the photograph of your wife inside. I understood then that what you are protecting is not things. It is love. It is memory. It is the part of your heart that still believes in beauty." Richard's composure finally cracked completely. The tears came in waves, months of suppressed grief and loneliness pouring out in ugly, healing sobs. Maria did not try to comfort him with empty words or awkward touches. She simply sat with him, her presence a quiet testimony to the fact that he was not alone. When the tears finally subsided, Richard looked up to find Maria still there, patient and steady as a lighthouse in a storm. "How do I learn to trust again?" he asked. "The same way you learned the first time," she replied with a gentle smile. "One person at a time, one day at a time, one act of faith at a time." 3 months had passed since that transformative day, and the penthouse apartment felt different now, warmer somehow, despite the same marble floors and towering windows. The change wasn't in the decor or the lighting. It was in the atmosphere itself, in the way two people had learned to coexist with mutual respect and growing friendship. Richard found himself looking forward to the mornings now, not just because of Maria's excellent coffee, but because of their brief conversations before he left for work. She would tell him about Sophia's college applications, her pride evident in every word, while he shared stories about his business challenges, finding her practical wisdom surprisingly valuable. "Mr. Coleman," Maria said one Thursday morning as she placed his coffee on the kitchen counter, "Sophia has been accepted to 3 nursing programs. The scholarships will cover most of the tuition, but there are still expenses. Books, supplies, housing." Richard looked up from his newspaper, noting the careful way she had presented the information. She wasn't asking for anything directly, but he could read between the lines. This was important to her, perhaps the most important thing in her world. "That's wonderful news, Maria. Sophia must be thrilled," he said, genuinely happy for them both. Over the months he had heard so much about the young woman that he felt as if he knew her personally. "She is scared too," Maria admitted, refilling his cup. "It is a big step, leaving home, starting a new life, but she is strong like her father was." Richard had learned about Miguel's death in small pieces over their morning conversations. Maria spoke of her late husband with the same mixture of love and loss that Richard felt when he thought of Margaret, a recognition that had bonded them in unexpected ways. That afternoon, Richard found himself in an unusual place, a jewelry store in the Diamond District. He hadn't been inside such a shop since he had purchased Margaret's engagement ring nearly 30 years ago. The displays of glittering gems and precious metals felt foreign to him now, but he had a specific purpose. "I need something special," he told the elderly jeweler, a man whose thick glasses and patient manner reminded Richard of his own father. "It's for someone who has shown me what integrity looks like." 2 hours later, Richard returned home to find Maria finishing her work in the living room. She looked up as he entered, noting the small wrapped box in his hands, with curiosity but not expectation. "Maria, could you sit with me for a moment?" he asked, his voice carrying an emotion she had learned to recognize over their months together. They settled into the leather chairs by the window, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the apartment. Richard held the small box in his hands, turning it over nervously. "Before I lost Margaret, before David betrayed my trust, I believed that people were fundamentally good," he began. "That belief died with my wife, was buried with my partnership, and I thought it was gone forever." Maria listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap, giving him the space to find his words. "When I left that safe open, I was testing you, yes, but I was also testing something else, whether goodness still existed in a world that had shown me so much darkness. You didn't know it, but you were carrying the weight of my faith in humanity." He handed her the box, his hands trembling slightly. "You passed a test you never should have been given, and in doing so, you gave me back something I thought I had lost forever." Maria opened the box with careful fingers, gasping softly at what she found inside. It was a pendant, simple and elegant, featuring a small diamond surrounded by delicate goldwork shaped like hands reaching toward each other, a symbol of trust, of connection, of faith restored. "Mr. Coleman, this is too much," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "It's not nearly enough," Richard replied firmly. "But there's something else. I've spoken with my financial advisor about setting up an education fund for Sophia. Full tuition, books, housing, everything she needs to become the nurse she dreams of being." Maria's hands flew to her mouth, the pendant box falling forgotten into her lap. No, I cannot accept." "Yes, you can," Richard said gently but firmly. "Not as charity, but as an investment. An investment in the kind of person who sees an open safe and thinks not of opportunity, but of vulnerability. An investment in the kind of mother who raises a daughter with such strong values that she writes school essays about integrity." The tears came freely now, but they were tears of gratitude, of overwhelming emotion, of a future suddenly bright with possibility. "There's one condition," Richard continued, and Maria looked up at him with concern. "I want to meet Sophia. I want to congratulate her personally on her acceptances, and I want to be there for her graduation when the time comes. Not as an employer, but as a friend of the family." Maria could barely speak through her tears, but she managed to nod, her heart too full for words. That evening, as Richard sat in his study, the same room where his crisis of faith had begun, he opened his safe with steady hands. Inside, among the important documents and precious items, sat the photograph of Margaret. He lifted it gently, studying her face in the soft light. "I found my way back, Margaret," he whispered to the image. With help from someone who understood that trust isn't about blind faith, it's about choosing to believe in goodness, despite evidence to the contrary. He thought about Maria, probably at home in Queens right now, sharing the incredible news with Sophia. He imagined their tears of joy, their excited planning, their bright hopes for the future. For the first time in years, Richard felt genuinely happy for someone else's good fortune. The next morning brought a surprise. Maria arrived with Sophia, a lovely young woman with her mother's kind eyes and quiet dignity. Sophia approached Richard with nervousness and gratitude in equal measure. "Mr. Coleman," she said, her voice strong despite her emotions, "I don't know how to thank you for this gift. I promise I will make you proud." "You already have," Richard replied, meaning every word. "By being raised by a woman of such character, you've already made us all proud." As he watched mother and daughter embrace, Richard realized that his test had indeed revealed something profound about human nature, not through Maria's response to temptation, but through her response to his confession, her choice to offer compassion instead of judgment, understanding instead of anger. The safe behind him remained closed now, but his heart had opened in ways he never thought possible again. Trust, he had learned, wasn't about protecting yourself from disappointment. It was about creating space for miracles to happen. And sometimes, those miracles came disguised as ordinary people doing extraordinary things, one act of integrity at a time.